horrifying moments. How Ukrainian mines blow up Russian tanks. After a daily meetup with military generals and officials, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky informed the public about an offensive that Russian forces launched in the Vuhledar operational axis on November 2nd. The Ukrainian Defense Forces stopped them in their tracks and inflicted significant losses. More details can be seen in the footage published a bit earlier by Tisk NIP News Media. The video shows that the attempt to go on the offensive near the city of Vuhledar in eastern Ukraine turned out to be a complete failure for the Russian army. The footage above was provided by the soldiers of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The Russians lost one T-80BV tank with a KMT-7 mine roller, two T-72B3 tanks, and an unspecified number of BMP-1, BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles. According to open-source data, Russians could have lost at least 10 armored vehicles today. Some sources suggest as many as 18 pieces got hit by Ukrainian artillery. The most remarkable is how quickly the Ukrainian forces spotted the Russian movements and responded appropriately. Apparently, the plan was to repeat the plan they applied to on the Avdiivka axis, where they assaulted Ukrainian positions with large numbers of armored equipment. That operation backfired too. More than 60 Russian vehicles were eliminated in quite a small area. Nearly a year later, they tried again. On Thursday, a large Russian force, apparently from the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, assaulted Vuhledar. It promptly ran over mines and stalled out in artillery and drone kill zones watched over by the Ukrainian Army's 72nd Mechanized Brigade. The result was the same in late 2023 as it was in early 2023. The Ukrainians wrecked a lot of Russian vehicles and killed a lot of Russian troops. Andrew Perpetua, an open-source intelligence analyst who tallies vehicle losses in Russia's 22-month wider war on Ukraine, underscored the scale of the disaster as the Russian Marines collided with the 72nd Brigade's defenses. In a single day, ending late Thursday, Perpetua counted nearly 60 damaged, destroyed, and abandoned Russian vehicles and just 17 damaged, destroyed, and abandoned Ukrainian vehicles. There have been worse days for the Russians in the last 2 years, but not many. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky succinctly summarized the Russian debacle. There was an attempt by the enemy to advance in the Vuhledar direction, but our soldiers stopped it, inflicting heavy losses on the enemy. Dozens of vehicles, many killed and wounded, Zelensky stated. It's hard to say why the Kremlin would launch yet another assault on a Ukrainian strongpoint that repeatedly has resisted earlier assaults, and why it would do it now. While the Russians have managed to make good the loss of thousands of armored vehicles and tens of thousands of experienced soldiers, by reactivating old vehicles and mobilizing raw new recruits, it would be inaccurate to say Russian forces have an abundance of excess combat power. And the Russians are busy. They're defending against the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, and Donetsk oblasts. They're sustaining counter-offensives outside Crimea and, most critically, Avdiivka. Three weeks of Russian attacks toward Avdiivka, just northwest of Donetsk city, have cost Russian brigades hundreds of vehicles and potentially thousands of troops. Losses on that scale should startle a careful army into radically switching up its operations. The Russian army isn't a careful army. Instead of pausing to weigh its losses against its objectives, it has doubled down and added a second frontal assault against prepared Ukrainian defenses. The cost, in people and materiel, is likely to grow as the assaults continue. Maybe the Russians will break through either in Vuhledar or Avdiivka, or in both. But is either settlement worth 1,000 lives and $500 million of hardware? Only the Kremlin and Russian society in general can answer that question. For the Ukrainians, the answer to the same question almost surely is no. The Ukrainian army takes greater pains to preserve its people and weapons. It quit Severodonetsk when that city became undefendable last year. It quit Bakhmut when it became undefendable earlier this year. Neither retreat precluded Ukrainian counterattacks in the same sectors, or attacks elsewhere along the 600-mile front line. The Ukrainians have proved their willingness to trade space for time and opportunity, even when the trade smells like defeat. It's not clear the Russians make the same calculations. Indeed, it's not clear what the Russians are thinking, at all.
Є позиція біля тебе. Все, займаємо тут. Я дивився, там нічого нема.